On paper, this battle was already decided. In September 1944, the German army finally had what it had been begging for all summer: time, fuel, and brand new tanks. Not patched together survivors from Normandy, not burned out veterans held together by luck and desperation. These were Panthers straight from the factories. Paint still fresh, engines barely broken in. Near the German border in northeastern France, in the Lorraine region west of the Saar River, General Hassel von Manteuffel studied his map and saw something he hadn't seen in months: a clean opportunity to win. Manteuffel wasn't a fanatic or a gambler. He was a professional, a master of armored warfare who had fought in Russia and North Africa. He had watched entire armies collapse. He knew Germany was bleeding on two fronts, but he also knew that wars aren't lost all at once. They unravel at weak points. And Patton's Third Army had one. Patton was overextended. His supply lines stretched hundreds of kilometers. His armored spearheads were scattered, racing east faster than fuel trucks could follow. Manteuffel's plan was simple and devastating: concentrate 58 Panther tanks, punch into Patton's exposed flank, isolate his forward units, and force the Americans to halt their entire advance. By every rule of armored warfare, it should have worked. What Manteuffel didn't know was that he was about to lead Germany's best tank into a battle where tanks no longer decided victory. And in the fog of Lorraine, the war would reveal its real winner. Manteuffel's confidence rested on a belief shared by nearly every German armored commander in 1944. That belief was that tank battles were decided by armor thickness and gun range. On paper, the Panther was built for exactly that kind of war. Its sloped frontal armor could defeat most American shells. Its high-velocity 75mm gun could penetrate a Sherman at nearly 2,000 meters, far beyond the effective range of the American 75mm gun. At long distance, the engagement was brutally one-sided. This wasn't fantasy. It was doctrine shaped by experience. German Panzer tactics had been forged in the open spaces of Poland, France, and the Eastern Front, where visibility stretched for kilometers and tanks fought like artillery pieces on tracks. In those environments, superior optics, thicker armor, and longer-range guns decided battles quickly and decisively. Manteuffel planned accordingly. He concentrated his Panthers rather than dispersing them. He allocated enough fuel for 2 days of intensive combat. He expected to locate Patton's armored spearheads, destroy them in detail, and force the American advance to grind to a halt. But hidden inside this logic was a fatal assumption: that the battlefield would allow the Panther to fight on its terms. Armor means nothing if you cannot see. Range means nothing if you cannot aim. And superiority means nothing if the enemy refuses to fight the battle you're prepared for. Manteuffel was planning a duel. What awaited him in Lorraine was a trap. At 7:30 on the morning of September 19th, the 113th Panzer Brigade began its advance. Almost immediately, the weather turned against them. A dense fog settled over the fields and hedgerows of Lorraine, thick enough to reduce visibility to less than 50 meters. In some areas, tank crews could barely see the vehicle directly in front of them. Commanders leaned out of their cupolas, straining to make out shapes in the gray haze. Drivers slowed to avoid collisions. Formations compressed and stretched unevenly as units tried to stay together. In a matter of minutes, the Panther's greatest advantage disappeared. The tank had been designed to kill at long range. Its gun, optics, and armor were meant to dominate open ground. But long-range fire requires sight, and in this fog, there was none. A weapon capable of destroying an enemy from 2 kilometers away was suddenly blind beyond a few dozen meters. The German advance continued, but it was no longer confident or coordinated. Radio reports became confused. Columns drifted off course. Crews could hear engines through the mist but could not identify whether they belonged to friend or foe. 15 kilometers away, American commanders received these same reports: engine noise, large formations, movement west. They understood immediately what the fog meant. If the Germans could not see, their technical superiority no longer mattered. This was not going to be a long-range armored duel. It was going to be a close, violent fight where speed and reaction mattered more than armor and gun size. And that was a very different kind of battle. What the lead Panther crews encountered in the fog made no sense. The first tank in column erupted in flame without warning, then the second, then another. Shots were coming from the sides, punching through thinner armor where the Panther was most vulnerable. German commanders swung their turrets left and right, firing blindly into the mist, searching for muzzle flashes that never appeared. They assumed they had run into American heavy tanks, but they hadn't. They had walked into a swarm. The weapon dismantling the German advance was the M18 Hellcat, a vehicle that, on paper, looked absurd. It had almost no armor, its open turret exposed the crew to shrapnel and small arms fire. By German standards, which value protection above all else, the Hellcat was practically suicidal. But the Hellcat had one advantage Manteuffel never calculated: speed. Weighing barely 17 tons and powered by a 350 horsepower aircraft-style radial engine, the M18 was the fastest armored vehicle of the war. It could move faster than a Panther could rotate its turret. In the fog around Arracourt, that speed became decisive. American tank destroyer crews did not fight in rigid formations. They fought as hunters, using radios, not proximity. Hellcat platoons repositioned constantly. They listened for German engines, raced down side roads, took up concealed positions behind barns, hedgerows, and tree lines, and they waited. When the Panthers rolled past, exposing their flanks, the Hellcats fired 2 or 3 armor-piercing rounds at close range, enough to kill, not enough to linger. Before the Germans could respond, the Hellcats were already reversing at full throttle, vanishing into the fog, relocating hundreds of meters away to strike again. The Panthers were built to absorb punishment. The Hellcats were built to avoid it. This was not a contest of armor, it was a contest of mobility, communication, and reaction time. And the German fire brigade was losing it, one ambush at a time. By late morning, the fog began to thin. For Manteuffel, this should have been a relief. Visibility was returning. The Panthers could finally fight the battle they were designed for. Reports from the front were confused, but this order was clear: push forward. The Americans couldn't be everywhere. What he didn't realize was that the lifting fog didn't free the Panthers, it exposed them. As the mist burned off the fields around Arracourt, small American observation planes, Piper Cubs, appeared overhead. Slow, fragile, and easy to overlook, they became the eyes of a system that the German army never truly understood: American artillery. What followed was not traditional bombardment. There were no ranging shots, no warning, no time to react. Instead, U.S. artillery units executed a method known as time on target. From miles apart, batteries fired their guns at precisely calculated moments. Each shell traveled a different distance at a different trajectory, but all were timed to arrive at the exact same second. To the soldiers below, it felt as if the sky itself detonated. Airburst shells exploded above advancing German infantry. Shrapnel cut through Panzer grenadiers, riding on the tanks and moving alongside them. Radios were smashed, antennas shredded. Command posts vanished in concussions and smoke. The Panthers themselves were rarely destroyed by the barrage, but something far more important was. They lost their infantry support. They lost their communications. They lost their commander's ability to see. Buttoned up inside steel hulls, isolated and deafened, the tanks became blind machines moving through a battlefield they no longer controlled. Without infantry to protect them from close assault, and without radios to coordinate movement, the Panthers were no longer dominant weapons. They were targets. The Hellcats were still out there, and now the trap was fully closed. By the second day, the battlefield told a story the German command could no longer ignore. Panthers weren't just burning, they were stopping. Some sat abandoned on the roadside, intact but lifeless. Others were blown in place by their own crews. The reason wasn't enemy fire, it was fuel. The follow-on unit meant to support the attack, the 111th Panzer Brigade, arrived late, or not at all, because it ran out of fuel before reaching the battlefield. Germany had built one of the most sophisticated tanks ever designed, but it could not reliably move at 20 kilometers when it mattered. This was the decisive difference. When American units ran low on fuel, tanks shut down and waited. Trucks arrived, engines restarted, the advance resumed. When German units ran out of fuel, the tank was finished. Crews disabled the gun, destroyed the engine, and walked away. There were no recovery vehicles, no spare powertrains, no replacements coming from the rear. The contrast became brutal. American recovery teams worked under fire, towing damaged Shermans back to mobile repair points. Mechanics welded armor patches in open fields. Engines were swapped, tracks replaced. Tanks knocked out in the morning could be back in action by evening. German Panthers had no second life. If a transmission failed, the tank was abandoned. If a track broke, abandoned. If the engine overheated or caught fire, abandoned. Every loss was permanent. The numbers tell the story. The 113th Panzer Brigade entered the fight with 58 Panthers. Within 24 hours, half were gone. Within days, only a handful remained operational. The brigade didn't retreat, it ceased to exist. The Americans lost tanks too, but theirs came back, and that difference decided everything. The Battle of Arracourt is rarely mentioned. It sits in the shadow of Normandy, Market Garden, and the Battle of the Bulge. There were no sweeping beach landings, no last stand encirclements, no dramatic collapse captured on newsreel film. And yet Arracourt may explain the outcome of the war better than any of them, because it strips away the mythology. The German Panther was not a bad tank. In many ways, it was superior to anything the Americans fielded in 1944. German crews were experienced, disciplined, and brave. They did not lose because they lacked courage or skill. They lost because they were fighting as individuals inside a system that could no longer support them. At Arracourt, American forces didn't win by building the best tank. They won by building enough tanks, enough radios, enough trucks, enough artillery shells, and by designing the doctrine around speed, coordination, and replacement rather than perfection. The Germans built armored knights, powerful, expensive, and irreplaceable. The Americans built a moving factory, one that traveled on tracks and wheels, one that could lose vehicles in the morning and replace them by nightfall. In the fog of Lorraine, the Panther met that system and had no answer for it. Arracourt proves that wars are not won by the brilliance of a single weapon or even a single battle. They're won by the ability to sustain loss, adapt faster than the enemy, and keep moving when perfection fails. That is why Germany lost, and that is why Arracourt matters.